Hi everyone, welcome to my channel. I'm Navya Sharma, and today in this video, I'm going to talk about microservices and monoliths. And I'm also going to discuss about their architecture and how are they different and why do companies face a need to change from monolith architecture to microservice architecture. So we'll be discussing and seeing how both of them are advantageous and what are the disadvantages of both of them, right? So just to mention that this video is going to be a part of my Tech Talks playlist. In this playlist, I discuss about some of the common terms and important concepts, and you can say buzzwords of computer science and IT related fields, right? So I hope that you'll enjoy this video and learn from it. So let's get started. So, it would be actually very easier for me just to tell you the definition of monoliths and then microservices. But actually, that is not a easier way to understand them because those definitions can be quite technical for you to understand. And that's where people get confused because of those technical words when they come into long definitions to read, right? So instead of jumping on to the definitions directly, let's try to understand it with a scenario as we always do, right? So we'll take up a scenario and we'll see that what architecture we are going to use initially and how are we going to migrate to microservice architecture and why is there a need to do so, and what are the differences between monolithic and microservices architecture. So let's get started. So as I said, we'll be discussing about a scenario, right? So here comes the scenario. On my screen, you can see that there is a very beautiful diagram drawn over here. So if you carefully see this diagram looks like kind of a hexagon kind of a thing, but it's just, you can just imagine it like a box or different packages or different layers in which all of these things are wrapped into, right? So we'll talk about everything. So this diagram is related to a monolithic architecture that I'm going to talk about, right? So let's say that the scenario here is that I want to start, suppose, a cab booking company, not cab booking actually, like it's like it'll is a service similar to Uber or Ola, right? So I want to start a cab booking company, and initially there are not many people in my team. It's a small team, and there are not many developers available. So we are just a startup, so we need to start with some kind of an idea, and we need some kind of development to be done. So when you're starting off with some kind of an idea, you can call it a startup, and you initially want to see that how my idea is being liked by people when it's being started at a small scale, because then only you will migrate your idea to a large scale if your idea is being liked by a lot of people, right? So initially, whenever you start some business, then you start from a small scale. So let's say that my cab booking service, right? So I am a member of the developer team, and I want to design my cab bookings, say suppose a website or an application, right? So in that, I need to have a user interface, server-side logic that is going to do all that stuff that you are going to see on the user interface. And apart from it, we're going to have a database, and we are maybe going to have some kind of third-party services that we'll talk about, right? So when we talk about monolith architecture, so now you just have started your business. So now I have started to develop my application for this cab booking service. So I'll initially target, because being a low scale, so my target is quite low amount of reach of audience right now. So I'm not thinking about it in a very high scale, right? That means that there are a lot of requests coming every second. So that not be the case, because since your business is new. So there comes into play the monolith architecture for smaller applications, where you don't have a need of scaling them up to a larger extent, where you don't have a very high customer base in that. So you can see that there is these are the user interfaces. Like you can see a mobile device over here for a driver and for a passenger, right? So you have the user interfaces. You have a laptop over here, that you have a web UI. So these are the user interfaces, right? And then you can see that this hexagon, the green outline hexagon, this hexagon is kind of basically a box, you can say, or a kind of a package in which you have coded all the logic for these services that you want to provide to your users. So it can be the passenger management, it can be trip management, it can be driver management, for some of the services being for your drivers and some of the services being for your clients, right? So there are many services, right? But if you see that all these services, we have put it in one box. These all services are tightly coupled to each other. By tightly coupled, I mean that they are put together in a single component, right? And they are interlinked because they are together in a box, right? So they are interlinked to each other, and there are various dependencies that these services have towards each other. So this is my server side logic, right? And as I said, that these are my client interfaces. So you saw client interface, you saw server side logic, and there we have a database. It's connected by a MySQL adapter in this diagram. So my database is a third thing over here to see, right? So generally in monolith architectures, you're going to have a client interface, you're going to have a server side logic. So in this, that logic is basically containing of a single box, a single component, you can say, in which all of your different services that you have for a driver or your passenger, they are kept together in one component inside your server side logics, because they are dependent to each other, interlinked, and they work together, right? So and then you have your database. So then you can have some third-party integrations that is case dependent. It's not necessary. These three things were necessary. The other things that Twilio adapter and SendGrid adapter is, and the Stripe adapter, Stripe is for payment integrations if you need so, and Twilio and SendGrid is for messaging, sending messages, message notifications or OTPs. That is also case dependent. So right. So in general, just to classify monolith architecture, we have kind of three layers over here. That is your client interface, then your server side logic, which is all of the logic is inside one box, right? And then you have your database. The database is going to talk to your server, right? So this was a monolith architecture. Now imagine that I created all of this. I created my backend services, all of these services are created, and it's well running, and I have my user interface, and I have my database, and everything is going fine. So my business started on a low scale, and it received a quite good response from its users. So since the user base is now going to increase, so when the user base is now going to increase, so then competition comes into play, right? There can be many competitors that are offering the same business to customers as you are doing. So you need to do something different and something more efficient and better. You need to offer something more efficient and better to your customers so that they stay on your service, right? So now imagine that my business has taken a great growth, and it has received a good positive feedback. So I need to scale up my game, right? So I need to scale up my business, and I need to include more features, maybe, or maybe do something efficiently, maybe like make the user interface more interactive, and or maybe reduce the response time of these services interacting with the users, or offer different type of services and alternate solutions. So whenever your application is going to go higher on a scale, you need to do this stuff. So the problem that is going to come over here when you talk about staying in a monolith architecture fashion is that your number of services will increase. So this box that you see over here, inside this, now they are currently, you can see 4 and 6 services right inside this together. But when you're going to scale up your game, then there will be services added in a large number, right? So this needs to be done very quickly before your competitor does that and offers to your customers, right? So all this process has to be very quick, very reliable, and very efficient, because you have to deal with a large customer base now. So if you keep on adding a large number of services in the same amount of box, so it will be very difficult to manage, and and the coding part and the deployment part and the maintenance part of all so many services interlinked together and kept together in one box will be very tough, because the number of dependencies is now going to increase. And even if you say that you have to make just one change, a small change in, suppose, say, passenger management service, right? Suppose now, say you have 100 services in here, right? And you just have to make one small change in a service, then you make that change. So when you make that change, you will need to cross check with all the services that are they doing fine, are they working fine, because the passenger management service had dependencies in all these services, right? So any change in a service which is an important dependency to other service can make the other service crash, because you need to test the other service which was dependent on the service that you updated, right? So you'll have to test every possible dependencies all over again. And for just making a small change in one service, you will have to deploy this particular unit, all the services again. So deploying everything again, because since you cannot deploy everything individually because they are kept in one box, right? So you'll have to deploy it all over again. And considering there are not just 6 services, since your business has scaled up, there are 100 services. So that deployment is not going to be that easy. It is going to take time. And the start time for, even after your code is, services are well running and deployed, the start time and the updation time is going to be getting very slow, because there's going to be a huge amount of load which is being kept together and the things are interlinked, right? So this is something that you would not like to have, which is going to slow down your like application, and which is going to slow down the building flow of your application, right? So this is not the only reason why we will want to switch from monolith architecture to microservices. One more reason is that, say, suppose your passenger management service fails, something bad happens and some proper error management has not been done and it fails. Now you see, if this service fails, it is suppose it's linked to the trip management service, say, suppose, right? So this error in this can cause an error in this also, and if this is linked to another service, then it can cause an error in this also. So in all, your, due to the highly coupled services and a lot of dependencies among them, your whole server-side logic can fail and the application can crash very easily just due to one error in one of these services, right? So you will not want that when you are wanting to make a good impression among your customers and you want your business to be scaled. So another reason is that, suppose, say, you want to scale up your service that is going to enable users to search for your cabs, right? So at any point of time, the number of people searching for cabs is going to be more than the number of people who are making payments. at that particular time, right? So that means that your uh, service that is going to offer your customers to search for those cabs has to be highly scaled, because there will be a large number of users doing that operation at a particular second, then the number of people doing a payment for their cab, right? So that means that one of your service might be in a need to be scaled more than the other service. But if you are keeping all these services in just one box, then that is actually difficult to do, because all of them will be having different scalability requirements. And that is not possible to achieve successfully if all of them are very tightly coupled and kept together inside one component, right? So now you will want to do something better so that these problems don't arise. So here comes the need of switching to a microservice architecture from the monolith architecture. So I hope that monolith architecture was understandable to you, and how we used it from initially from the scratch by building our application. But now we need to move to the microservice architecture, because we have reached high love from the audience, and we need to scale it so that we are able to provide better service to our customers, right? Now we need to achieve a solution to all our problems. So this is one way of achieving a solution to your problems, right? So this is the way when we are going to talk about microservices. So in microservices, what we do is that this thing of the client user interface, you can see, this is the user interface. This is going to be the same. You'll have the user interface, but inside that box in which we kept all our services together, instead of keeping them all of them together tightly coupled with each other, dependent on each other inside one component, we are going to separate them and make each of them an individual service. So what I mean to say is that when you all had all these services inside one box, so now you are going to break. I don't know if that break is an appropriate word or not, but just to make you understand, you're going to break all those services apart from each other, and this, like, you're going to divide your server-side logic into different components, and each component will be a different service. So when you do that, you make sure that each service is inside a different component. So it's individual, and it's not interlinked and tightly coupled to another service or dependent on another service. So let's see the example over here, right? So you can see these were the client interfaces, and you can see we had the passenger management, the billing service, the driver management service individually as a component, right? Earlier we had it all together inside one box, but now we have it inside a different box that is their own individual box. So this service is now a different service. It has its own logic, and it is not being dependent or linked to any other service, because it is responsible for being operational on its own. So it is since it's now isolated from all other services, any service, if suppose say any service, any kind of service breaks down or it faces any error, then it is not going to break my whole application. Maybe for some time this passenger management service can become unavailable due to the failure, but my billing or my driver management service won't go down. So at least these services will be available to users. Your whole application won't crash. So don't you think that it's a better way to do this, because your whole application is not going down, so your users can still access some of the features of your application while you get this feature fixed, right? So now we fixed one of the problems, right? But if you see that, you might think that how are these services going to talk to each other? So in one of my previous videos, I've talked about APIs, application programming interfaces. So if you don't know about APIs, then I would suggest you to go to the video that I made about APIs. I will be attaching the link in the description. We can view that and then come back to this video and continue it, right? So these services are going to talk to each other through REST APIs, right? And REST APIs are basically going to provide different methods. Like this passenger management service can have maybe like view the profile of the passenger or view your previous booking history of the passenger. So it can have many functions, right, that the passenger can perform or want to perform. So these will be available and accessible through the REST APIs to any other service if they want it to be used in any other service, right? So suppose in the passenger web UI, you want to see the profile of the passengers or the previous history of their booking. So you can make a call uh, through, we can make an API call to the passenger management service and make an appropriate API call to the function that you want to serve, right? So suppose if you want to retrieve the details of the profile, make a request to that endpoint of the API and you'll get the proper response, and then you can display it here, right? So even in if driver in driver management, you can do the same. In driver management, if you want to show the details of that passenger to the driver, you can make an API call to maybe to the passenger management or any service that is responsible for doing that, right? So these services are now kept differently, and they can talk to each other through API calls, or inter-process communication is also there. So there are a kind of many ways of communicating that is dependent on your requirement, right? So we got this issue solved also. Now, if you want to scale this passenger management service more than the billing service, then it's very easier because they are not kept together now. You can scale it as much as you want. You can scale this as much as you want. So the different level of scaling is now also achievable. That is totally dependent on your requirement that actually keeps on changing when you deal with a large amount of customer base, right? So that's great, right? Most of your problems are actually solved because you have achieved availability of your application, you have achieved scalability, you have achieved reliability, and that is actually a great achievement because you are on a good path to satisfy your customers, right? So I hope that uh, microservices, what are actually they and why do we actually need them, is clear to you. So there is a question that in which cases should we use microservice architecture and which cases should we use monolithic architecture. So I hope that this actually must have been already answered to you, because the scenario, the way in which I talked, I started with a very base scenario in which we had to start a business, right? So here it goes the same, that if you have a new idea in your mind and you know that your business is like going to be a small one, small business, and you don't see any kind of uh, a rapid scaling up needed over very short duration of time, then you can actually start with the monolithic architecture and see that how your business goes. Because if you directly jump into microservices, it looks very good to you that it is solving all your problems, but it is actually a kind of complicated stuff to do, right? Because all these things that you see involves very technical terms and knowledge to be known. So technically qualified professionals are required to be needed into your team. So you may not have those technically qualifications at that point of time. So don't engage directly into microservices if you don't have the prerequisites that you will need to maintain your applications if you jump into microservices, right? So that is going to be a problem then. So it's better in that case you start with monoliths and you see that if your application is going, if your business is going quite nice, then you can maybe afford some more better team. You can have a proper DevOps team. You can have a proper agile methodology running, and then you can have a good amount of developers in your team so they can work together, and then you can actually run around the solution of the microservices. So I think that this instead of directly jumping into microservices, you can see what actually your business need is, then think about it. And as I have also discussed about many pros and cons while I was talking about both of these architectures. So I hope that that was also clear to you. So if you talk about microservices, one more thing that is actually advantageous is that the agility of your software development lifecycle is going to increase. So by that I mean that since all these services are now different, right? So they are going to have their own code branches in which all the developers may not be working on all these services. So maybe say there are two developers working on passenger management, two different developers working on billing service, right? So all of the developers will have a different service to work on. So that is actually going to increase the velocity by which the development and the deployment is done for each of the service. And since they are not kept together and they are now loosely coupled, so the deployment will also not be very heavy to do task. It will be comparatively light, and the start time for your application will also be comparatively less than monoliths, if you're dealing with so many services, right? So in that case, microservices will be a very good to go solution. So I hope that this is kind of clear to you, because you might hear these terms like microservice and monolith architecture when you study your subjects, or maybe even if you do any kind of internship, or if you're talking to anybody who has some technical knowledge. So it's better that you know about all of these stuff, because maybe then if it interests you, you can go and read more about it, and then you can use this knowledge in your future project development maybe, or maybe you can come up with a new idea. So I hope that these concepts were clear to you. So with this, I would like to end the video, and I would be attaching some of the links for you to read in the description. If you like the video, then please do share it and subscribe the channel for more such technical content coming up. So thank you for watching the video.